Hey guys, welcome to HipHughes History. In the next 15 to 20 minutes, we're going to try to tackle one of the biggest questions there is out there in an American history course, namely, why did the American Civil War happen? What was going on back then? Big topic and big broad thematic answers for you in the next, like I said, about 20 minutes. So if you're maybe in an intro to an American history course, you're in a high school course, you're cramming for the exam, this probably would be a good lecture for you, or you're just crazy on the internet and you watch weird videos. But if you're doing any type of serious kind of research, historian type of stuff, what are you doing watching me? Do some serious research. So let me go grab maybe 4 or 5 sacks that I have over in the corner of my room, and we'll open them up and maybe we'll learn something. Let's go find out. Giddy up. Oh no, you done it now, Mr. Hughes. You got the wrong prop. No, I don't. One of the first things that I'm going to lay down for you guys is that at the heart of the Civil War is really the doctrine of states' rights, of the definition of federalism, of what the 10th Amendment really means in correlation with the rest of the Constitution. Now, I know a lot of American scholars and American people believe that the Civil War was fought to free slaves. And although there are elements of truth in that, there's a whole lot of truth inside that statement, it is fundamentally not the major cause of the Civil War. It might be the end result, but the Civil War, more than anything, is fought over the 10th Amendment. Let me kind of, tell you what the 10th Amendment is, and then we'll go right into kind of an early example in the early 19th century of this in action. The 10th Amendment is part of the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, and what it states is that all power that's not delegated to the federal government, all power in the Constitution that is not given to the central government's authority, is reserved for the states. And now that gets complicated when you look at other parts of the Constitution, like the General Welfare Clause, or the Elastic Clause, or the Interstate Commerce Clause, and unwritten parts of the Constitution like judicial review. But nevertheless, the words are there. And when you take an issue like slavery, or we're going to look at the National Bank, or maybe today gay marriage, things that are not clearly defined in the Constitution, health insurance, then is it just the state's domain, or can other parts of the Constitution expand federal power? Well, at the heart of the matter, this is not settled, but brought up early on under John Adams' administration. John Adams is a strong federalist. I would say his middle name is Schwarzenegger. Yeah, baby. And he believes in federal power. And he might even be using it to an extreme. When he signs into law, the feds and Congress pass it, the Alien Sedition Act. And this law, early in the 1800s, basically kind of set immigration policy that was very formulated to really benefit the Federalist Party. Didn't clamp down on French immigration, which was a Democratic-Republican kind of stronghold country. And the sedition part made it really illegal to print things in the newspaper that couldn't provably be true. And this led to the arrest of some, anti-Fed, Democratic-Republican publishers. And it was seen really as the beginning of federal tyranny, as a law that proved that this is the federal government, the Great Britain taking control and stomping out on liberty. Look, liberty! Ah! So the response from the southern states, and now we're getting closer to the Civil War concept, was the Kentucky-Virginia resolutions. And in the Kentucky-Virginia resolutions, they come up with the concept of nullification. And what nullification basically means is no, I'm not going to do that. Like I've always used the analogy in class that, look, if the federal government is in a sense your parents, and I know you're not a child and the states aren't children, but in the analogy sense that they, in a sense, form the central crux of the family that holds the children together, and they tell you to wash the dishes, right? You might do that grudgingly, or they tell you that your curfew is at midnight on weekends, or whatever, you might be okay with that, might be a little angry. If they tell you to clean your room, you might even do that, maybe not, maybe there's a fight in the brew. But if they told you to go to school naked, no, I would nullify that. I would say, I don't care who the you are, I'm not doing that. And that's what the southern states are saying to the Alien Sedition Act, is look, I know there's a supremacy clause. I understand that you are supreme in the relationship in federalism. But I'm not going to enforce that law. I'm not going to do that. That violates natural rights, states' rights. That violates really the rule book, the Constitution. Therefore, we're just not going to do that. And what you're setting up there with nullification is, if I can nullify the Alien Sedition Act, and I can try to nullify a Tariff Act or the National Bank or something like that, can I nullify, Supreme Court decisions related to slavery? Or can I nullify, maybe eventually the abolishment of slavery? Can I nullify the relationship? Can I eventually say, I don't need to be part of this? If my father keeps punching me in the eye, eventually I have a right to say, you're not my dad no more. So that is the doctrine, the states' rights doctrine, that really is the blood vein underneath the Civil War that is going to run through this. So let's look at one more example of the kind of states' rights doctrine stuff, and then we're going to jump right into the expansion of slavery argument and what I call the stink thesis. So here we go, guys. Giddy up. Let me go grab my second sack of little kind of reasons for the Civil War. Another one for you, Andrew Jackson. I think that really this is a great example, if you look at 1832, of really kind of like a mini almost civil war that shows you that the issue of slavery really wasn't even on the table. Now look it, there are abolitionists, and we're going to get to this more in a second. There is, Harriet Tubman, and there is Frederick Douglass, and William Lloyd Garrison, and Nat Turner, and John Brown, and there's all of these cast of characters that really fight hard to abolish slavery, violently sometimes. But that's not the government. That's not the president, that's not the Senate, and that's not Congress. So when we're talking about why the nation's going to break up, we'll talk about that cast of characters and have abolitionists are going to play their part, but they're outside the building of power. The building of power is Congress and the White House, where they're formulating laws and Supreme Court decisions. And in that vortex of power comes the Tariff Act in the 1832. And basically a tariff, this is another thing that separates Democratic Republicans from Federalists, is a tax on imports. And basically the concept is that the Northern Federalists enjoyed tariffs and passing tariffs because it insulated their the business industry in the Northeast from foreign competition. So they were able to sell more American goods to American consumers. The bad side of that is if you at Walmart shopping, and then the price of goods is going up. So the concept is that the Democratic Republicans, which represented more of the Southern interests, were more about the farmer in the store. The farmer in the hoe, the farmer in the hoe, whatever. But that, if you're going to buy a hoe, you want to buy a hoe on the cheap. And the tariff is raising the price of the hoe. Oh no, we're in sticky situations here. But basically, when Andrew Jackson signs a Tariff Act in the early 1830s, and he finds that the southern states are nullifying it, and Andrew Jackson is a Democrat and a Southerner, he has to stand up for the Supremacy Clause. And he sends troops, I believe, to the border of South Carolina, basically saying, you want to go there? Nullify? Nullify! It's like Whiskey Rebellion. Remember that? Whiskey Rebellion, when the Pennsylvania farmers were like, we ain't paying no taxes. And Washington was like, bam, bam, bam. Yeah, you are. That's Supremacy Clause. So this eventually gets compromised out, the Andrew Jackson nullification crisis of 1832. But at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the southern states thinking they have a right to nullify, and the northern federal government saying we have the right to enforce law. All right, we got to get to the good stuff, because all that is all good, but it's not the gravy. We want to get into some good vocab and some, magic expansion of slavery concepts. So here we go, guys, right? I got 5-10 minutes for you, and then you don't have to look at this anymore. All right, you should say this 3 times. The Civil War is about the expansion of slavery. The Civil War was caused by the expansion of slavery. It's the expansion of slavery. The expansion of slavery is fundamentally like the multiple choice answer on the Regents exam. But sectionalism is usually kind of labeled in the textbook as 1820 to 1860. And it's 1820 because of the Missouri Compromise. So if we break up this issue in its most fundamental way, it's really manifest destiny that is going to cause the Civil War. The way that I explain it in class is that in 1820 you have kind of 13 kids in the family that are girls and 13 kids in the family that are boys. Slave, girl, boys, North, right? Free states. And that basically this relationship in the family between the states and the federal government, everything is working good because everybody feels equally represented. But every time that mama goes and gets pregnant, remember that? Oh, Northwest Ordinance 1787, which allows new territories to enter the Union. It's like a new baby is coming into the family. And all the girls, all the southern states are sure hoping it's going to be one of them, another girl. And all the northern states, for the balance of power argument, are hoping that it's going to be a free state. It's really not about the abolition of slavery, not inside that circle of power I was talking about before. There are a few voices of abolitionism within the federal government that they're drowned out by the southern interest and by northern people that are probably a little bit afraid of saying anything. Basically, one of the side theses that I kind of develop is the idea that stink don't stink until it's in your backyard. In 1820, Northerners are really not talking about slavery on a grand scale. I mean, sure, you have some abolitionist press and you have some individuals that are raising a stink about it, but for the most part, Northerners kind of can ignore this issue. But in 1820, it's clearly going to be on the map, and that is when Missouri enters the Union. And for the first time, there were other states coming in as well, Maine, but that's not the issue right now, is what do we do? What do we do about this issue of slavery in these new territories? Well, the southern states, they believe that it's a liberty issue. Liberty being to have slaves, but they believe that the federal government doesn't have the power to prohibit slavery in these new territories. And they want slavery because they want to expand their land. They want to bring slaves with them all across the land in order to make a profit. Now, the northern government, I wish that they were against it for abolitionist reasons, but they're really free labor. They're for immigrants, and northern immigrants especially. You know, Homestead Act, going out west and settling the land. And how can they do that if they're competing with free labor, with slaves? Remember, Abraham Lincoln was a member of the Free Soil Party. And I know it feels abolitionist, but it's really not. Not in the sense of freeing all of the slaves. So in 1820, the worst compromise in the history of the world, the worst solution to a problem, is the Missouri Compromise. They look at it, they look at the map, and they go, what do we draw a line down the middle like that? That'll solve the problem, right? They draw a ling, I think it's like 3630 north of the Louisiana Purchase, which states that, look, if mama give birth up there, it's free. Down here, it's slave. Problem solved. Cha-ching. It's like putting tape down in a room that you share with a sibling. You have that side of the bedroom, and I have this side of the bedroom. So you figure out the bathroom's over there, and then you fight again. But from 1820 to 1850, the Missouri Compromise is how we try to solve the issue of the expansion of slavery. In 1850, we have kind of the fruits of the Mexican War coming into the Union, the Southwest states, and the big boy, which is California. And suddenly the Missouri Compromise isn't really working out. So we have to come to the drawing board again. And in 1850, remember, we started in 1820, 1850, we have 10 years left. They come up in Congress with this deal, the Compromise of 1850, which allows California to come in as a free state. But now, you know, the South wants something in return. So they get the Fugitive Slave Act. And now I'm going to go back to my sting thesis, because this, more than anything, is going to bring the issue of abolitionism into the North, or I should say the issue of slavery into the North. Because what the Fugitive Slave Act did, which is it basically said that the Southerners had a right to reclaim their property in the North, escape slaves, and that if you were complicit in hiding slaves, that you were complicit in a crime. Therefore, you're basically telling all Northerners to be complicit with slavery. That stinks! So what I'm going to argue here is that it's not inside the power of government where people are talking about the issue of slavery as a moral or ethical issue, but certainly around that dome with the Fugitive Slave Act, we have Northern abolitionists growing. We have movements growing. The John Brown clan is growing. The idea of some kind of action is growing. And when then there's smoke, most people think there is fire. And Southerners can certainly see the smoke of abolitionism. So the other concept as part of 1850 is what do we do next, right? We have California as a free state, and we have the Fugitive Slave Act on the books. No wonder the Underground Railroad needs to go to Canada. But we come up with the concept of popular sovereignty. This is the constitutional mechanism to solve the issue. Not constitutional, but the congressional law way. That we will just let the people of the new territories, of the new states, vote. That this is democracy. We'll let democracy play itself out. And that will solve the problem. And again, we kind of have the federal government kind of doing this. Kind of really not dealing with the issue of slavery or the expansion of slavery in a concrete way, but trying to compromise and put little band-aids on what really is a national problem that is going to eventually spill over into the Civil War. So in 1854, we have kind of the first example of popular sovereignty with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, where we're going to vote in Kansas and Nebraska on slavery in first Kansas. And what occurs is what exactly you think would occur. If I said we're going to have a vote on abortion for the whole country or for a state, who do you think's coming to town? The pro-choice community and the pro-life community. Well, take that to the umpteenth level. And who do we have showing up in Kansas? We have, die-hard Southern slave owners. And we have people like John Brown and radical abolitionists that are seeking to do, what they see as the Lord's work. So in 1856, we have something called the Petawawa Massacre, which is basically John Brown going hardcore on some slave-owning families in Kansas. And that eventually leads to him going to Harper's Ferry to try to overthrow the government. And eventually he is arrested and he is executed by the federal government. And we can hear songs like John Brown's Body, right? It's moldering in the grave. This is the song of abolitionism. It stinks. So as we move on and we go through bloody Kansas and we look at the Dred Scott decision of 1857 when the Supreme Court steps in it and comes in and says, we'll deal with the issue once and for all. Slaves are property. There you go, Congress. Now you don't got to deal with the issue anymore. And when they think they're dealing with the issue, they're actually giving kind of like gas to the fire of abolitionism. Because when the abolitionist community is going to get angrier and their voices are going to raise, smoke, fire, South sees smoke, think they're fire. So I'm going to argue that when Lincoln gets elected, and look, we can go and look at Lincoln's words. When Lincoln was fighting for the Senate seat against Douglas in 1854, he would go back and forth on slavery depending where he was. I don't think that he's a racist, but I did hear him say or read, I don't believe in the equality of the races. He dabbled with the idea of maybe African Americans going back to Africa. He was not a huge proponent of the 14th or 15th Amendment. But I do believe in his heart that he was against slavery. But when he gets elected, his mantra is save the Union, not free the slaves. I think that he would have done anything to save the Union and avoid the Civil War. But nevertheless, when he gets elected, the South sees him as one of those fire starters, as an abolitionist, as somebody that is ready to free the slaves. And therefore, the deep session of the deep southern states happens immediately when he gets elected. And then later down the road, we'll go into the hardcore Civil War where we're fighting North versus South. But nevertheless, the Civil War is about, at the end of the day, saving the Union, the 10th Amendment. It's over the expansion of slavery. It's over what states' rights are. It's over nullification. And at the heart of the matter, are states part of the United States voluntarily, or are they now mended as one, inseparable forever and ever? Amen. So we hope that you learned something. I know that I rambled